Now 5:03 now to a first alert. An assisted living facility in Greenville partially evacuated after dangerous levels of carbon monoxide are detected during this weekend's bitter cold.
It took place early Saturday morning at Living Tree Estates. Greenville fire and first responders on scene say they were about to move people from the living facility to a safe part of the building. Buses and ambulances showed up ready to take everyone to Shepherd of the Hills Lutheran Church in Greenville. But while ventilating the building, firefighters learned that the cause of the carbon monoxide levels was an iced over furnace vent pipe. After fixing the issue, everyone was able to re-enter that building.